Hi everyone, welcome back to Was Is and Yet to Come. First off, I want to start by saying I know it's been a while and I'm sorry for that, but I hope everyone is having a great start to their new year. Here is to 2025, and let's see what it has to offer. It can be good, it can be bad. Honestly, we can never predict the years that are to come, but let's go back in time for this episode to about 100 or less years, depending on the time frame. We're going back to the interwar period time. This was the time between World War I and World War II. The interwar period time really didn't begin until after 1918 when World War I ended. So this began in the 1920s when consumerism rose to an all-time high. People of this time were really invested in becoming middle class or upper middle class. But to put you in the mindset of these people during this time, you really have to think back to women of the time period and men of the time period. Women were trying to find new ways to act and dress within society, and men had just come back from war. They were trying to find new ways to spend time with their families and entertainment purposes within society. One thing that also really changed during this time period was electricity became increasingly common within the households, specifically in the 1920s. Therefore, there were new innovations created to implement electricity within appliances for the household. These new appliances were things such as electric washing machines, motor-driven vacuums, electric sewing machines, and even the refrigerator. And if you think about the time that we have now, these things really do help us save time and allow us to have more free time to watch TV or go and spend time with our families. They get done a lot quicker. And of course, companies and businesses were paying attention to this new shift in society and new idealisms for the household. Therefore, they evolved their advertisements to be persuading the women of the decade. They did this by advertising through envy, jealousy, and fear of not fitting in. This also was not just done for companies with new appliances for the household. This was done for beauty products and even cigarettes of the time. I'm sure you have seen some advertisements from this time period. However, I will pop up a few just here so that you can see what these advertisements were like. This one here mainly advertises towards women, of course. And it says, if you want to keep slender, and who doesn't these days, avoid sweets and smoke Lucky Strikes. The other two are definitely advertised more for appliances, and they specifically target the husbands of wives, saying, give her a Hoover and you give her the best. The other one also specifically states the most precious of all gifts in large font. This was an advertisement for housekeeping appliances. And honestly, these advertisements really did work during the time period. Many people were going out to stores trying to get their hands on these new innovative technologies for their households. However, the biggest issue was that people really couldn't just afford these things out of pocket. So the first time that we see massive debt become a thing was in the 1920s. When people began to have this new saying of spend now and pay later. General Motors was one of the first companies to advertise their installment loans for the average American citizen. The invention of the assembly line really allowed for them to meet product demand. The fascination and idea of becoming middle class or upper middle class and having more free time started to become a reality for most American citizens of the time. Because of this, they were just taking out installment loans left and right, and they were spending now so that they could pay later. But as we approached the late 1920s and the early 1930s, the stock market had crashed, people were losing their jobs, and the banks were closing. So as the economy was plummeting, so was consumerism. People were no longer buying new things that were being advertised. Instead, they were putting their money towards the other debts that they had acquired and focusing on paying for their house and their cars so that they didn't lose them. The government was having a really difficult time trying to get people to go out and purchase things so that they could get the economy back up and running. They weren't able to do this until men had to go off to war and women had to step up in order to pay off their debts. Advertisements quickly shifted to nationalism and patriotism in order to get people to start buying items again. But of course, people weren't buying and spending like they used to. There was now an immense fear of not being able to pay back their debts. So less people were taking out installment loans. Because the fear was so widespread, there needed to be a solution to this. Companies needed to know that they were going to get their money back, and people needed to know that they were protected from taking out too much debt. Some solutions were implemented, such as characteristics to prove creditworthiness. However, it wasn't until the Fair-Isaac system was created. This system provided protection against credit discrimination and a more accurate algorithm for determining credit scoring. Credit cards were also invented, and at the time they were made out of cardboard. On this credit card, there was an identification number, which most people began to use these to purchase items. The identification number was then used for companies to communicate between one another for who was able to pay off their debt. It was also used for people to call in and check their credit score. Back then, credit history and credit scoring was kept on index cards. The Fair-Isaac system was adopted by department stores, credit holders, banks, and auto lenders. Interest rates were also implemented in order to combat inflation and the ability to pay off debt. But as we moved from the 80s to the 90s and into the early 2000s, checking your credit score became a lot easier as computers were more of a functional household item. Proceeding into more of a modern time span, we'll go back to the 80s. We'll talk about the purchasing of a home, because that seems to be quite the issue that we are facing at this moment in time. The average home in the 80s cost about $86,800, compared to the average home as of 2023 in the third quarter was $435,400. Using the same years for data purposes, in 1985, the average household income was $60,050, and as of 2023, the average household income was $80,610. According to this data, the average household income only went up about $20,000 within 38 years, and the average household cost went up $350,000 in 38 years. Assuming that you would have met the average data for 1985 and 2023, I'm going to use a simple 30-year FHA loan in order to give you an idea of what your monthly mortgage payment would have cost. So in 1985, the interest rate for this type of loan was 11.96%. Your down payment of 5% would have been $4,340. Your monthly income would have calculated to around $4,601.53. Therefore, your monthly mortgage payment would have been about $1,093, and not accounting for taxes or insurance, it would have been $898. Meaning this was only about 20% of your monthly income in order to pay for your mortgage payment. Comparing to 2023, the interest rate for this type of loan was 7%, meaning your 5% down payment for this type of loan would have been $21,770. Your monthly income would have calculated to about $6,179.37. Your monthly mortgage payment would have been $3,569, and not accounting for taxes or insurance, it would have been $3,014. This was nearly 50% of your monthly income in order to pay for your mortgage payment. Looking at these numbers, something isn't quite making sense. In 1985, the interest rate was 11.96%, and we're told that interest rates will increase due to inflation. But the interest rates as of now and 2023 are not as high as they were in 1985. It was 7%, and as of today, it is 6.56%. In 1985, it wasn't extremely difficult to get a 5% down payment for your home, if you were paying a down payment at all, and you still were only paying 20% of your monthly income. As of today, it is very difficult for people to save the money for even just a 5% down payment, and you are still paying nearly 50% of your monthly income. Again, this is only if you met the average data in 1985 or in 2023. If we draw a parallel between now and the 1920s or the 1930s and the debt crisis, it does seem as though we are in a debt crisis now, but it's kind of shifted from fear to acceptance. Many people look at debt as if it's a part of life, and typically it's not their fault. It's extremely difficult to have necessities or the bare minimums in life without using a credit card or having to take out a loan. So, what are your thoughts on this? And my question to you is it interest rates, debts, or inflation that are the main issue? Is one more than the other, or is it all just kind of a mix? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.